Welcome to episode 94 of Mouth Dancing with your host Young. This is the big 94. 94 episodes. Your favorite podcast. You've been listening a long time, and I've been talking a long time. I think the episodes probably average about somewhere like 11 to 12 minutes per episode, because some of them are like 20 minutes to half an hour, and some of them are only like 9 minutes or 10 minutes. And you times that by 94, that's a lot of time. I'm not sure exactly how much time. Let me calculate that real quick. 94 times 12 equals 1,128 minutes. Divided by 60 equals 18.8 hours. Did I calculate that right? I'm not sure if I did. Let's try the more conservative estimate of 94 times 11 minutes. 1,034 minutes. Divided by 60 equals 17.2 hours. Wow. You don't have anything better to do than to listen to this for 17 hours of your life? That's like almost a whole day. That's like, I don't know, 2/3 of a day or 3/4 of a day? I don't know, my math's pretty bad actually. But anyway. Today I wanted to talk about nukes in North Korea. It's a pretty important topic, actually. You know, people want peace on the Korean Peninsula, and they're like, well, you know, North Korea's the problem. They need to denuclearize. They got to get rid of their nuclear weapons. And that's what America's always demanding of North Korea. They want the North to become a totally defenseless, pacifist country. I mean, if you were in North Korea's shoes, would you believe anything the US says? Like, let's see, what happened to Gaddafi? You remember him? He got rid of his country's missiles, right? And a few years later, America invaded Libya and assassinated him. Now, if you're North Korea and you see the US doing stuff like that around the world, would you think that it's a good idea to believe the US's promises? Like, oh yeah, just get rid of your nukes and everything will be okay. No, the instant North Korea does that, America's gonna swoop in and invade the country, assassinate Kim Jong-un and all of his leaders, and yeah, that's gonna be the end of North Korea. And then the Korea will be united under the same government as South Korea. And the South Korean government is basically a puppet of America. I'm not sure if you knew that or not. South Korea is not a sovereign country. Like the military, for instance. When it comes to wartime, there's a clause in the Korean government's, documents that say that the US has operational control of South Korea's military if there's a war. So that means if South Korea and North Korea, or South Korea and China, or South Korea and Japan, or some other country go to war, America has control of South Korea's military. Now, does that sound like a sovereign country to you? Or does having US military bases in your country sound sovereign to you? Like, imagine if South Korea had military bases in America. Can you imagine that for a second? That's just a completely insane idea. No one would think that's normal. But there are US military bases in South Korea. Not just South Korea, but all over the world. In Japan too, for instance. Now let's see, what else is there? Well, let's see, the former president of South Korea, Moon Jae-in, he tried to end the war between North Korea and South Korea. Because technically, officially, they're still at war with one another. There hasn't been a declaration of peace between the two countries. And he thought, that would help them reunite eventually and reconcile. That would help a lot, of course, not being at war with one another. But U.S. government official Jake Sullivan, I believe that was his name, he stepped in and said, sorry, we're not ready to do that yet because that might mean the U.S. military has to leave South Korea. So this is all about America. America doesn't care about Korea being divided. It just cares about having control of the South because it's a very important position in the world. It's right next to China and Japan. And yeah, that's pretty much what it all boils down to. So North Korea is actually, the government is, in a way, it's more of a sovereign Korean state than South Korea is. Think what you will of Kim Jong-un and his policies or whatever, but it's technically the more sovereign half of Korea. And yeah, if I'm Kim Jong-un, I see America, just invading other countries, killing the leaders like Saddam Hussein, and just bringing democracy and freedom supposedly. I wouldn't believe them. Any smart person wouldn't, because it's just completely insane to trust the US government, which carries out coups in other countries if they don't like the government, and carries out coups in other countries if they want control of their resources, or just invades them outright, like Iraq, Afghanistan, a bunch of countries in the Middle East for the oil there. And next, let's talk about 40s. Did you ever drink 40s in your younger years when your main goal was to just get as wasted as possible? Buy some Old English or Mickey's or what else is there? I don't know, there's all kinds of 40s. I don't remember all the different brands. Maybe Bush? But there was one called 800 Ice. And I think it was an offshoot of Old English. And this stuff was ice brewed beer. If you know anything about cheap beer, you know that ice brewed beer has the highest alcohol content. And the taste is pretty disgusting. It tastes like you're drinking gasoline or something, It just doesn't taste like some kind of natural beverage that you should be, ingesting into your body. But it does get you fucked up really badly and really quickly. You drink a couple of those and you smoke a joint or whatever, and you're pretty toasted. I mean, back then when you're young and have a high tolerance for alcohol and drugs, it's not as big of a deal. But if I did that now, I think I'd probably pass out. But back then, I used to be able to drink a lot because I drank so much in the first place, so I had a high tolerance. And I was just younger and able to process the alcohol pretty well. But if you want to get drunk on the cheap, that's the kind of stuff you drink. 800 Ice or Carlo Rossi wine. You know that stuff? It's like those huge bottles of cheap wine. Tastes disgusting, but it's a good way to get drunk on the cheap. Yeah, I mean, that was what we did a lot of times in our teens and 20s. That was how we spent a lot of our time, was just like getting alcohol or weed or whatever and just getting as intoxicated as possible. That was like our main goal in life. Now when I think about it, it's not appealing to me at all. It just seems disgusting. The alcohol, first of all. And just being drunk is not as fun as it used to be. I don't know why. I don't know what happened. Like, the buzz doesn't last as long, and the enjoyment I get from it is just not as great. But some people remain boozers well into their later years. Maybe until they die even, like my grandpa, for instance. He was a serious boozer. He drank alcohol literally every single day. and not just small amounts of it, but huge amounts of it. He would just guzzle it. Smoked cigarettes too. He smoked and drank all day, every day. And he lived into his 80s somehow. I don't know how he did it. Maybe people were just tougher back then. The thought of that, though, to me is just crazy. Like, I don't think I could do that. I don't think I'd be very productive, for one. I'm not sure if he had a job, really. He just seemed like he was an alcoholic. And my grandma did all the work. I'm not sure if he ever had a job. He seemed like he was just always at home drinking. Which is kind of insane to think back on. How did they make ends meet? I know they were poor though, so they weren't really making ends meet. That was kind of a weird, random divergence, or what do you call that? Digression? Another thing I was pondering recently is the NFL. In the regular season, you could have a tie score, right? And the game just ends as a tie. But once you hit the postseason, like in the playoffs, you have to have some sort of tie-breaking procedure because the game can't end in a tie. They have to decide a winner, right? The winner gets to go to the next round of the playoffs or to the Super Bowl. And the Super Bowl, I'm sure, has the same rules. There has to be a winner. So if it goes into overtime, I know they play like another 2 15-minute halves or something like that. And whoever wins is the winner. So you get another chance to score in those 2 halves of overtime. But then, what if there's still a tie? Well, in soccer, like during the World Cup, if there's still a tie after overtime, then it goes into a penalty shootout. I thought that would be awesome if the NFL did that too. They should just do a penalty shootout. Like, hey, there's no winner at the end of overtime, so let's put up some soccer goals and have these football players try to kick goals. That would be pretty awesome, wouldn't it? I mean, that should be the way they decide tiebreakers for every sport, is do a soccer penalty shootout. Because those are pretty exciting, actually, and a really good test of how well a player can handle pressure and stress. It's very psychological, It's more psychological than it is physical, I think. And there's the goalie there trying to psych you out. So you're psyching yourself out, and the goalie's trying to psych you out. There's a lot of psychology going on there, right? It's like you gotta be a psychologist to psychologize it or something. Yeah, that's what I want to see, though. And that's how I made the cover design for this episode, was that thought. That's why you see an American football player on a football field, or soccer field, as they say in America, and Australia. Do they say soccer in Canada too, or do they call it football? No, I think they call it soccer too, because they have Canadian football, which is kind of like American football with slightly different rules. Yeah, even in hockey, that would be great. Like, you see guys in hockey uniforms trying to kick penalty shots. I guess they'd have to take off their ice skates, though, wouldn't they? That'd be pretty dangerous without taking them off. Or they could just do it with hockey equipment. Do they do penalty shooting in hockey? I don't know anything about hockey. They probably do penalty shots, don't they? I bet they do. And I never really cared about hockey. Some people are really obsessed with it because the players end up fighting each other. It's kind of like a mix between sport and, I don't know, MMA or something like that. I don't really like sports where there's just too much equipment involved. I like sports where it's simple, like soccer or basketball. Even baseball is a little bit too complicated. You gotta have like a diamond-shaped field. You gotta have baseball bats, mitts, balls, all this gear that the players have to wear. It's just not very cool. The simpler the better. All you need are some players and a ball and a field. Sports like soccer, rugby, basketball, those are the best. Anything more complicated is just like, it's not very democratic when the players have to have all this gear and you gotta have all this special playing area and shit. It's not a real sport. It's also the beauty of something like skateboarding. Like surfing, you have to go to the beach and you gotta have a surfboard and probably a vehicle that can carry your surfboard. Well, in New York, you can just take the train to the beach. But most places you can't really do that. And snowboarding too. Think about how complicated that is. You gotta buy a snowboard, which is thousands of dollars. You gotta buy some special boots, which are hundreds of dollars. You gotta have some sort of a special snowsuit and goggles. You gotta go all the way up in the mountains, which are hundreds of miles away. And you gotta have a lift ticket. And it's gotta be winter. It's just too complicated. I mean, it's cool. I'm not knocking it if you're into it, but it's not something very simple, which anyone could do at any time. Yeah, that's what I'm sort of an elitist about. Everyone's an elitist about something different. That's just my personal thing. And skateboarding, it's relatively cheap, and all you need is a patch of concrete. That's it. Those are the best, purest, most beautiful activities, are the simplest ones that are accessible to most people. Anyway, that's how I'm going to end this episode, because people need to know that. That's my philosophy, and I think it should be everyone's philosophy. Keep it simple and keep it beautiful, because simple equals beautiful. I guess the only exception is being simple-minded is not beautiful. Being a simpleton is not. It's actually pretty ugly and stupid, so don't be a simpleton. Have a complex mind, but do simple activities because they're beautiful. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye.